first walk our audiences through the agenda of this call. So we'll just quickly do a quick introduction, and then we'll speak about your experience of applying to business schools and what did you learn in the process. And then we will speak about the second part of this interview, which is covering the interview experiences at INSEAD and LBS. Right? So we'll cover all the three interviews. So INSEAD has 2 and LBS has 1. So we'll cover all the 3 interviews. And we'll start from there. Okay. So how about we begin just by quickly introducing, you can just introduce yourself and we'll take it from there.
My name is Prashi, and I applied to 3 business schools. I have prior experience of working in consulting and corporate strategy at a telecom firm. And through the process of, my work experience and my previous qualifications, I kind of discovered that a global MBA will further, change career paths for me, and hence I decided to apply to these global business schools. And then I kind of approached Akshat for his assistance, and here I am. Like, that's it.
Cool, perfect. So I think what would be useful for our audiences would be if you can just share your experience of applying to business schools and what were your prominent learnings in terms of building an application strategy. Just for our audiences, I'd like to tell you upfront that you have already received interview invites from LBS and INSEAD, and you're awaiting your interview invite from ISB. So the result is awaited, but it would be most likely we are 3 on 3. Alright, perfect. So just in terms of your learning experience, in terms of your application strategy, what would be your primary tips and what would you suggest future applicants?
So the most important learning during the whole application process and the admission process has been in terms of discovery of yourself, how you want to approach your career, where do you see yourself 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line. And it's not just about you. I mean, if you apply to some schools, some suppose INSEAD or LBS, I think the other most important learning also has been in terms of how the schools can fill those gaps. How will you contribute to those communities? And in the process of finding answers to those, you introspect a lot and you discuss a lot. And I ended up discussing that a lot with a lot of my friends in terms of basic things like your strengths, weaknesses. So overall, it's a very interesting phase, I think so, and which involves learning about yourself as well as more deeply about what your future interests may be. So, for example, I may know that I want to pursue a field, that suppose XYZ, but when you're applying to a school, you need to be sure of what you're talking about, what your plan is, because the school will examine that. So, I think these are the 2 most important learnings. So one will be, in terms of your knowing yourself, discovering yourself, and the second would be, I think, corroboration of your future goals. And if maybe it's not proper, you might want to take a step back and then reevaluate, because the school kind of examines it very, very carefully in terms of what will you add if you pursue this to that community, so on and so forth.
All right. So in terms of timeline, so when did you start looking at business schools, and how much time do you think, in your opinion, candidates should keep in mind before they decide that they want to apply to business schools?
So I started writing my essays in, I think, June mid. But I think there's a lot of legwork that needs to happen before that. So when you think of, first of all, you need to be very clear about what schools you want to apply to, because I remember I used to get so confused at times as to, in terms of the number of schools I have to apply, the kind of requirements I have from my business school. I think that clarity needs to come at least, I think, 8 or 9 months prior to your application. That is what I feel. Then in terms of the essays, I think, like I said, I started writing the essays in June, July. And of course, you need to write GMAT before that. You need to make sure that you know which person you will kind of approach for recommendations, and if that person is the right fit. So all that needs to be done, I think, a little before 3 months or so.
All right. And in terms of preparing for GMAT, any tips that you would like to share with the applicants?
So, GMAT, the only learning that I have had is GMAT is it's not a difficult exam, it's a tricky exam. And you need to have a very regular disciplined routine when it comes to GMAT. So I'm saying that my job at that time, because I work in consulting, and I think otherwise also it's pretty demanding for you to, if work 10 hours and then get back and read for GMAT. But I think you should make sure that you at least commit 2 hours a day. Suppose if your date is 2 months down the line, I think you should definitely read for at least 2 hours, every day, because I think GMAT, the only key is regularity, because once you get acquainted with the concepts, it's just very trivial, and once you get acquainted with the fact that, okay, the exam might trick me here, might trick me there, and that'll come only when you practice on mocks, write a lot of mocks. So I think one is to, you should be very regular, and B, you should try to understand the exam a lot more by writing, I think, at least 7-8 mocks. That's what I feel.
Got it. So just to summarize your application strategy, so 3 key things stood out. One is that start early in terms of your writing your essays. You started way back in June and applied to the schools in round 1. Number 2, when it comes to GMAT preparation, make sure that you are practicing regularly. And number 3, just in terms of overall application strategy, just be introspective. So these were the 3 key takeaways I would say. So just in terms of overall advice to business schools, any other points that are left, or should we move on to the part 2 of this discussion about discussing your interview experiences at different business schools?
The advice would be, I think, like we read for GMAT every day, I think it's important to read essays also every day once you start writing. And I think because every time you read it with a very fresh set of mind and fresh perspective, and then, oh, this doesn't make sense. The next day it will make sense. So unless you're sure, you need to be very sure that, I am not into the number game of applying to 6 schools and writing shoddy essays. I think that does not make sense. You need to, if you're fine with applying to 3 schools, you apply to 3 schools, but make sure your essays are spot on. Because I don't think so there's room for imperfection like these days. It's getting very competitive that way. So
all right, thank you so much.